Alright, buckle up, because we're about to dive into one of the most chilling and bizarre chapters of European history. Imagine sitting down to dinner, and instead of the usual pasta or steak, you're served. Well, let's just say it's not from the grocery store. That's right, we are talking about cannibalism, and not just any cannibalism, but families who made it a part of their lives. This isn't just a tale of desperation or survival. It's a story that will make you question what you think you know about human nature. So, if you're ready to explore the dark side of history, stick around. You won't believe what we are about to uncover. Cannibalism in historical records. Explain how documented cases differ from legends. When European settlers arrived in the New World, they encountered practices that were often misunderstood or sensationalized. Cannibalism was one such practice, and the documented cases differed significantly from the legends that spread back to Europe. Historians have since worked to separate fact from fiction, using primary sources and archaeological evidence to paint a more accurate picture. Documented cases of cannibalism in historical records often involve specific, albeit grim, details. For instance, during times of extreme famine or siege, historical records show that people resorted to cannibalism as a last resort. The siege of Leningrad, for example, is one such case where starvation led to desperate measures. In contrast, legends and myths tend to exaggerate or romanticize these events, often portraying cannibals as monstrous or supernatural beings. These stories were used to instill fear or to justify colonial actions, rather than to provide an accurate account of what happened. Another key difference lies in the context and motivation behind the acts. Documented cases often reveal that cannibalism was a survival strategy, a ritual practice, or a form of warfare. For example, some indigenous tribes in the Americas practiced ritual cannibalism as part of their cultural and religious ceremonies. These practices were deeply rooted in their belief systems and were not merely acts of violence or desperation. Legends, on the other hand, often strip away this context, presenting cannibalism as a mindless or evil act. This simplification ignores the complex cultural and historical factors that influence these practices. Moreover, the sources of these records differ greatly. Documented cases come from journals, letters, and official reports written by those who witnessed or participated in the events. These accounts, while not always unbiased, provide a more grounded and detailed understanding of what transpired. Legends, however, are often passed down through oral traditions or sensationalized by storytellers. They are shaped by the biases and imaginative interpretations of those who tell them, leading to a distorted version of history. By examining these differences, historians can better understand the true nature of cannibalism in historical contexts. Notorious family groups introduce the most infamous European cannibal clans. In the annals of European history, a few family groups stand out for their gruesome practices, leaving a dark stain on the continent's past. These clans, often shrouded in mystery and horror, have been the subject of countless tales and studies. Their stories are not for the faint-hearted, as they involve acts of cannibalism that defy comprehension. One of the most infamous of these clans is the Sornay family. They were a Scottish clan that lived in a cave near the coast. The family was known for their brutal attacks on travelers, which they would then consume. The clan's reign of terror lasted for nearly 25 years. They were said to have killed and eaten over 1,000 people. Their gruesome end came when they were finally caught and killed by a mob. The Sornay family story has become a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the depths of depravity to which humans can sink. Another notorious family group is the Hot Brothers, who operated in the United States but had European roots. They were known for their extreme violence and cannibalism. The brothers would often kill entire families, taking what they wanted and leaving the rest to rot. They were eventually captured and executed, but their legend lived on, inspiring countless stories and songs. Their brutality was unmatched, and their story serves as a chilling reminder of the dark side of human nature. The Tyson family, originally from France, is another example of a cannibalistic clan. They were a family of highwaymen who would rob and kill travelers. They would then consume their victims, believing that it would give them strength and power. The family was eventually caught and executed, but their story continues to fascinate and horrify people to this day. Their actions were driven by a twisted belief system, a stark reminder of how easily people can be led astray. Social conditions show economic or environmental triggers behind such cases. In the annals of European history, instances of cannibalism often emerged as a grim response to dire social conditions. Poverty, famine, and environmental disasters frequently acted as catalysts, pushing communities to the brink of survival. When economic systems failed, and resources became scarce, desperation could lead to extreme measures. For example, during periods of severe famine, entire villages might resort to cannibalism as a last resort. The lack of food, coupled with the inability to trade or migrate, created a perfect storm of desperation. Economic triggers played a significant role in these tragic events. In feudal societies, peasants were often at the mercy of their lords, who controlled the distribution of resources. When crops failed or trade routes were disrupted, the lower classes suffered the most. Without access to alternative food sources, they were forced into unimaginable choices. The economic disparity between the rich and the poor exacerbated the situation, as those in power often had the means to escape the worst of the hardship. This left the vulnerable populations with few options, leading to instances of cannibalism as a means of survival. Environmental factors also contributed to the rise of cannibalism in Europe. Natural disasters, such as floods, droughts, and harsh winters, could devastate agricultural yields, leading to widespread starvation. In isolated communities, where help was not readily available, people turned to desperate measures to stay alive. The lack of infrastructure and medical knowledge further compounded the problem. Without modern technology or scientific understanding, people were ill-equipped to handle environmental crises. This combination of economic and environmental triggers created a volatile mix that sometimes resulted in cannibalism as a last resort. In some cases, war and conflict also played a role in driving people to cannibalism. During times of war, resources were often diverted to the military, leaving civilian populations to fend for themselves. The destruction of farmland and the disruption of trade routes further exacerbated the problem. In the midst of chaos, people were forced to make desperate choices to survive. The breakdown of social order and the lack of governance often led to a survival of the fittest mentality. In such dire circumstances, cannibalism could become a grim reality for those who had no other options. Methods and patterns describe behavior, hunting tactics, and victim profiles. In the grim annals of European history, instances of cannibalism were often marked by specific methods and patterns that reveal the desperation and brutality of the acts. Victims were typically chosen based on availability and vulnerability. In many cases, the elderly, the sick, or those who were already weakened by starvation or disease were targeted. This was not necessarily out of malice but rather a grim practicality. Those who were already struggling to survive were seen as the most viable sources of sustenance. Children were also unfortunate targets, as they were often easier to overpower and less likely to put up a fight. The choice of victims was often dictated by the circumstances of the time, whether it was famine, war, or extreme isolation. Hunting tactics varied widely depending on the situation. In some cases, cannibalism was a last resort during times of extreme famine. Families or communities would resort to consuming the dead to survive. This was often done in a ritualistic manner, with the bodies being prepared and cooked in a way that mimicked traditional food preparation. In other instances, cannibalism was more opportunistic. Individuals or groups would target travelers or outsiders who were unaware of the dangers they faced. Ambushes were common, with victims being lured into isolated areas where they could be overpowered. The use of weapons was not always necessary, as many victims were already in a weakened state. Behavior patterns among cannibalistic families were often characterized by secrecy and deception. To avoid detection and retribution, these families would go to great lengths to hide their activities. They might bury the remains of their victims in remote locations or dispose of them in ways that made it difficult to trace back to them. In some cases, they would spread rumors or blame other groups for the disappearances. This deception was crucial for their survival, as being caught could result in severe punishment. The psychological impact on the perpetrators was also significant. Many struggled with guilt and shame, which could lead to mental health issues or even suicide. The stigma associated with cannibalism was immense, and those who were caught often faced harsh consequences, including execution. Public reaction. Explain how villages and authorities responded. In the annals of European history, instances of cannibalism have sparked a range of reactions from villages and authorities. These responses often hinged on the context, the perceived justification, and the societal norms of the time. Villages, for instance, might react with a mix of horror, fascination, and even complicity. In some cases, communities turned a blind eye to cannibalistic acts, especially when they were committed out of desperation, such as during famines or sieges. The sheer survival instinct could temper the moral outrage one might expect. However, when cannibalism was perceived as a deliberate and malicious act, the response could be swift and severe. Villagers might ostracize the perpetrators, leading to social exile or even vigilante justice. Authorities, on the other hand, often faced a delicate balancing act. They had to weigh the legal and moral implications of cannibalism against the practical realities of their jurisdiction. In many cases, cannibalism was met with harsh penalties, including execution. The legal systems of the time often reflected the societal abhorrence for such acts. For example, in some regions, cannibals were tried and punished under laws related to murder and desecration of human remains. The authorities' response could also be influenced by the status of the perpetrators. Nobility or those in positions of power might receive different treatment compared to commoners, reflecting the class dynamics of the era. Interestingly, public reactions could also be shaped by superstition and folklore. Cannibalism was often associated with witchcraft and dark rituals, which could amplify the fear and hostility towards the accused. Villagers might engage in rituals or practices to cleanse their community of the perceived evil. Authorities, too, might incorporate elements of superstition into their legal proceedings, further complicating the matter. The interplay between legal, social, and cultural factors made the response to cannibalism a multifaceted issue. Understanding these dynamics provides a glimpse into the societal values and fears of the time. It also highlights the complex ways in which communities and authorities grappled with acts that challenged their moral and legal frameworks. Trials and punishments outline judicial processes against cannibal groups. When European settlers encountered cannibalistic practices among certain indigenous groups, the judicial processes that followed were often shaped by the cultural and legal frameworks of the time. These processes varied widely depending on the region, the legal system in place, and the specific circumstances of the case. In many instances, the trials were conducted under colonial laws that often lacked nuance or understanding of the cultural contexts in which cannibalism occurred. This led to hasty judgments and severe punishments that were not always proportionate to the crimes. The judicial processes against cannibal groups often began with investigations that were heavily influenced by the biases and prejudices of the colonial authorities. Evidence was gathered through interrogations, often under duress, and testimonies were taken from both the accused and witnesses. These investigations were not always thorough or fair, as the legal systems of the time were not designed to handle such complex cultural practices. The trials themselves were often public spectacles, intended to deter others from engaging in similar behaviors. The accused were frequently denied the right to a fair trial, and the outcomes were often predetermined by the prevailing attitudes towards cannibalism. Punishments for cannibalism were severe and often included execution, imprisonment, or exile. In some cases, entire communities were punished collectively for the actions of a few individuals. The severity of the punishments reflected the deep-seated fears and moral outrage that cannibalism evoked in European societies. These punishments were not only intended to serve justice but also to assert the authority of the colonial powers over the indigenous populations. The legal processes and punishments meted out against cannibal groups were a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play during the colonial era. In some instances, the judicial processes against cannibal groups were more nuanced and took into account the cultural and social contexts in which the practices occurred. For example, in certain cases, the courts recognized that cannibalism might have been a response to extreme circumstances, such as famine or warfare. This recognition led to more lenient sentences or even acquittals. However, these instances were rare and often overshadowed by the more common practices of harsh and swift justice. The legacy of these judicial processes continues to be a contentious issue, highlighting the complexities and injustices of colonial legal systems. Cultural transformation show how these events shaped folklore and fear. The tales of cannibalistic families in European history have left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape, shaping folklore and instilling deep-seated fears. These stories, often passed down through generations, have morphed into cautionary tales and eerie legends that continue to haunt the collective imagination. The most infamous of these is the case of the Saunay family, said to have lived in a cave in Scotland. Their alleged crimes sparked a wave of horror stories that emphasized the savagery lurking just beyond the civilized world. These narratives served as a reminder of the thin line between humanity and monstrosity, reinforcing societal norms and the importance of community vigilance. Folklore often exaggerates and distorts historical events, turning them into moral lessons. The Saunay legend, for instance, was used to warn against isolation and the dangers of living outside societal structures. It became a staple in local folklore, with parents telling the tale to keep children in line. The fear of cannibalism also found its way into literature and art, with writers and artists using it as a metaphor for various societal anxieties. Gothic novels, in particular, drew heavily from these tales, creating a subgenre that explored the darker aspects of human nature. The fear of the unknown and the monstrous other was a recurring theme, reflecting the societal unease with the uncanny and the taboo. The impact of these stories on popular culture is still evident today. Horror films and television shows often draw inspiration from historical accounts of cannibalism, using them to tap into primal fears. The trope of the cannibalistic family has become a staple in the horror genre, with films like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Hills of Eyes echoing the themes of isolation and savagery. These modern interpretations keep the folklore alive, ensuring that the fears and lessons of the past continue to resonate. The cultural transformation brought about by these tales is a testament to their enduring power and the universal human fascination with the macabre. They serve as a reminder of the darker side of human nature and the importance of societal bonds in maintaining order and safety. Modern re-evaluation. Explain how historians separate fact from myth. Historians today approach the topic of cannibalistic families in European history with a critical eye, sifting through centuries-old accounts to separate fact from myth. They start by examining the original sources, often written by outsiders who may have had biases or limited understanding of the cultures they described. For instance, many accounts of cannibalism come from explorers or missionaries who viewed indigenous practices as barbaric. Historians now question these narratives, considering the context and potential motivations behind them. One key method used by modern historians is cross-referencing multiple sources. If only one account exists, it's harder to verify the claims. However, when several independent sources describe similar events, historians can weigh the evidence more carefully. For example, some accounts of cannibalism in Europe during times of famine might be exaggerated or entirely fabricated. By comparing different records, historians can identify inconsistencies and determine which details are more likely to be accurate. Another important aspect is understanding the cultural and historical context. Cannibalism, whether real or alleged, often served a purpose in the societies that practiced or were accused of it. Historians look at the social, economic, and political factors that might have led to these practices. For example, in some cases, cannibalism might have been a survival tactic during extreme hardship. In others, it might have been a ritual or symbolic act. By considering these contexts, historians can better understand why certain stories emerged and how they were perpetuated. Additionally, historians today are more aware of the impact of colonialism and cultural bias. Many accounts of cannibalism were used to justify the subjugation or eradication of certain groups. By recognizing these biases, historians can approach the topic with greater sensitivity and objectivity. They also consider the possibility of misinterpretation. What one culture might have considered cannibalism, another might have seen as a different practice entirely. This nuanced approach helps to clarify the historical record and prevent the perpetuation of myths. As we wrap up this exploration of some of the most infamous cannibal families in European history, let's recap the key points we've covered. We've delved into the desperate circumstances that led families like the Sornebene clan and the Tyson family to resort to such extreme measures. We've seen how isolation, poverty, and mental health issues played significant roles in these tragic stories. We've also discussed how these tales, while shocking, offer a glimpse into the harsh realities of life in past centuries. It's easy to feel a sense of horror and disgust when hearing these stories, and that's completely natural. But it's also important to remember that these were real people, facing unimaginable circumstances. Their stories serve as a reminder of how far we've come in terms of societal support and mental health awareness. If you found this video as fascinating and thought-provoking as we hope you have, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What surprised you the most? What other historical mysteries would you like us to explore? And if you're hungry for more intriguing tales from the past, stay tuned. Next week, we'll be diving into the mysterious world of historical disappearances. From the lost colony of Roanoke to the vanishing of the Mary Celeste crew, we'll be exploring some of the most baffling disappearances in history. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical deep dives. And as always, thanks for watching. Until next time, keep your curiosity piqued and your mind open to the endless stories that history has to offer.